Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast with myself, Joe LaVacca, but not Joe Gambino today, as Dr. Joe was away on vacation. Even though my partner in crime was away, I was not alone, and we were joined today by a very special guest, Dr. Michael Ray. Michael is a chiropractor, clinical researcher, and educator with a special interest around chronic pain. Michael shares his journey and frustrations through pain and navigating the medical system, and what led him to pursue this career of not only helping people in pain, but studying very interesting correlations and findings in pain to better guide us in the future. Michael shares his thoughts on navigating the placebo and nocebo narratives that surround pain and treatment, and he leaves us with his best advice on how to tame pain. We hope you enjoy this episode and all future episodes of the Beyond Pain podcast. And if you do, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this with someone you might think it could help. Without further ado, here is episode 16, Taming Pain with Dr. Michael Ray.
Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your hosts, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast with myself, Joe LaVacca, and normally Joe Gambino, although Joe Gambino is away on vacation today. You can find me at strengthandmotion_PT. You can find Joe Gambino at Joe Gambino DPT. And you can follow the podcast at Beyond Pain Podcast. And if you are on YouTube, we also post videos of the podcast there as well. And you can find that at cupsofjoes_PT on YouTube. And even though Joe is not here today, I'm joined by a very special guest, someone I've really been looking forward to chatting with, and that is Dr. Michael Ray. Michael is a chiropractor and clinical scientist, expert in all things related to pain, and we are very, very excited to have him on the show. Michael, welcome. And if you want to introduce yourself, give us a little bit more background to the listeners, we'd greatly appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate you guys having me here, and I'm excited to be on the podcast and chat about all things pain. Background on me is interesting. Kind of twisty-turny road to where I'm at today. So I'll just start with current. I'm an assistant professor of health and human sciences at Bridgewater College. Just finished my third academic year there, and then primarily focus research on chronic pain, kind of multifaceted approach. So I'm not, the way to think about this for kind of context is you have your basic science research, so people who are trying to further figure out, correlates to the development of chronic pain and pain in general. So this could be like nociception research, genetic research, animal model research. And then you have kind of so basic science fills into preclinical and clinical research, so looking at working directly with humans experiencing chronic pain. And then you have an arm of translational and implementation research, so that kind of looks at, are we doing what we should be doing with patient experiencing chronic pain? I hang out on the latter end. I'm not a basic science researcher, but I do look at translational and implementation research, so are we adapting clinical practice guidelines? And then I look at interventional research. So what should we be doing with people experiencing chronic pain?
That's awesome. And I think that your work could solve a lot of problems I see on social media these days. So hopefully we can keep talking about that. and introduce more and more people to it. Mike, I got a couple of fun questions for you before we get rolling into the other stuff. And I know you're completely unprepared for these. These are going to be real hot button topics.
Please.
We have a background of like coffee on this show.
Yeah.
And a little bit of the background on that is Joe and I used to work together at a clinic. This was maybe 10 years ago. We were pretty young at the time. And we just literally started putting a camera up. It was the beginning days of all these things. We just start to riff about random topics. It's cringeworthy. Like, it's cringeworthy. But we keep them up there in the YouTube thing. And it's sort of like this reflection of who we were and where we came from. But we always made sure that we had a cup of coffee in our hands while we were doing this. I see you are sipping some coffee there, my friend.
Do. Yeah.
So tell the listeners, how does Dr. Michael Ray take his coffee? What is special about your cup?
That it depends, right? On a whole host of things. I mean, if I go for quantity, I just need caffeine. And so that's different than if I'm going for quality, which I prefer quality most of the time. So really fun story would be into a father's studio for somebody who had a 5-year-old daughter. And so my partner and her got me an AeroPress, which I had an AeroPress. I've been interested in it because we do day hikes and stuff like that and travel. And so I wanted something portable. So AeroPress, if I'm traveling or need just like a single cup, pour over if I have extra time. And then if I'm needing just a lot of coffee, it's probably going to be a French press or drip. And then I'll take it a step further. My preferred like sourced region is Ethiopian coffee.
Wow, you are the first guest to go into the region. Well done. A lot of fancy AeroPress. I think this is the second time AeroPress has come up too. So now I'm intrigued. Now I got to kind of dive into that world myself. I normally do have coffee. I'm actually at Courtney's clinic right now in Colorado. And the only thing we have left over were these like little Nespresso dark roast, like espresso shots.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to start trembling on the podcast with you. So I opted to forego the coffee today and just stick with water. But very good. I'm going to follow up now with region for future guests. So you've just set the bar, my friend.
Well, it makes a difference. Like Ethiopian is super floral and fruity. And so
that's great. All right. Second question. What are you reading, watching, or listening to that you would recommend to listeners out there? And if you have one of all three, go for it. If you want to just pick one, totally cool.
Great. Reading. I'm currently reading. You're hear my dog. It'll be black in here. She'll say, I don't know. She's like, where are you talking? Reading currently. I'm reading Tolstoy. Anna Karenina. That's how you say your last name. It was recommended to me by someone on Instagram, and I've not read Tolstoy before, so I was like, let's do it. I've been reading for probably like 3 months, and I'm only like 200 pages in of the like 1,500 pages you have to read for this book. So I'm restraining buying any other books. Trying to finish it, like preferably by the end of 2024. But it's good. It's really good. There is very clear lines of philosophy layered through this book by Tolstoy, and I like philosophy, especially when it's kind of intermixed into fictional stories, so to speak. So that's what I'm reading. And what I'm watching currently, we're watching a couple of things. So we aren't big like TV people. We maybe get an hour in, not even every night, maybe every other night. And so we kind of pick and choose when new shows are coming out. So House of Dragon, we watch on Sunday nights. We're a big Game of Thrones fan. And if you haven't seen this episode this past Sunday, I won't spoil it, but it was a big one. And then Presumed Innocent, which is a new show, Jake Gyllenhaal, also really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah, Cord and I have been also watching Presumed Innocent, and we're pretty caught up in that as well. We both really enjoy it. It's funny because, Cord was comparing it to the Presumed Innocent, I think back in like the 80s or early 90s with Harrison Ford. And we were sort of thinking, like, was it based around that? Because then Courtney's like, well, I think I already know who did it. And I'm like, well, no, I've never seen that movie, so don't ruin it for me. Yeah, so I was like, okay, well, even though she thinks she knows like who did it, every episode when those shows are really well done, you're like, well, maybe this guy did it. Maybe she did it to herself. Maybe somebody else did it. So I've really, really been enjoying that. I think we only got like 2 more episodes left.
Yeah.
Until the finale there.
We just caught up last night. We got back into town yesterday. So I actually watched episode last night. And yeah, that one also ended on, it's not a great note. I'm curious.
Not a great note.
Yeah.
The House of Dragon, I watched House of Dragon. I'm also a big Game of Thrones fan too. I haven't started season 2 yet. So yeah, definitely no spoilers. Cool. But the thing I was laughing about with season 1, I was like, is everyone just named Aegon? It's Aegon. So whenever I would read, I'd read these things online because, obviously every Monday there's got to be a meme. There's got to be people posted about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, Aegon died. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm still, it's not spoiled for me because I have no idea which one actually died.
Yes. Well, like we've said, it's been very political. It hasn't been the usual Game of Thrones. Like, my neighbor for Game of Thrones is really a wedding, so it's like, all right, are
totally.
Die? Is there going to be war? Like,
right, 100%. All right, man. Last one. And you can take this any way you like. Fun fact about life that you've recently learned, or about your topic of pain that you've recently.
Fun fact of something I recently learned about life or pain. It's a tough one. Pain, I can say, would be easier because it's related to my research. So, like, we had the recent publication in the journal of pain on mortality before the stream we're going to talk about.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
From a life standpoint, it's probably going to be related to being a dad, because it's just like you're constantly learning on the fly and like developing into this concept of being a dad. Like you don't walk out of the hospital and you're like, I know what I'm doing. Like it's just this evolution. So yeah, I think that's going to be neat and fun learning experience along the way. If my daughter regularly teaches me, just like her curiosity about the world and trying to make sense of it, and her empathy towards other humans, and it's pretty awesome to see. So that's kind of a constant reminder to me, like what it means to be human, especially watching her develop.
I love that. Perfectly said. I feel the same way about my daughter. I think even my mentality as a clinician and human being shifted when she came into the world, and even my viewpoints of movement, like watching her just learn to move and go through it naturally without me, oh my God, coaching her, cueing her, telling her what posture to stay in. She just figured it out. And I'm like, then I'm working with all these clients, which I'm sure you can relate to. And a lot of the things they'll initially open up with is like their posture and how do they move, and they should move one way. And I'm like, well, I don't know, if you have any nieces, nephews, or young kids, I mean, what do you do with them?
Yeah.
Now, it always sparks like a little interesting conversation person to person. So I really appreciate you saying that, because I can totally relate to it. So thank you, man. Thank you for sharing our 3 hot seat questions. The rest of the stuff I think will be probably a lot easier for you to answer. They'll all fit into your wheelhouse, and I'm looking forward to hearing your answers on those too. So the podcast, obviously, Michael, is called Beyond Pain, or Hope. Our desire here is to share stories about pain, mainly from clinicians, because we're people too. And I think a lot of people are always surprised when I share that I'm in pain or I've had an injury. It's almost like, oh, well, aren't you the physical therapist? Like, you're not allowed to have pain. You're not allowed to have an injury. Like, I thought that's why you started doing all this. So the first question we always love asking guests is, what is your relationship with pain? What's your injury history? And, what was the thing that maybe sparked you down this road? Because they all seem to usually blend.
Yeah, those are good questions. And I was working with a client a while back, and she asked me a similar question. I was like, oh, I probably should write this up at some point. Because it's not something that, at least for me, it's not something I regularly put out there and talk about openly. Not because I'm fearful of doing it. It's just usually the spotlight's not on us, right? Like, we're trying to help other humans who are having these experiences. And one of the fears I have in working with humans is I don't want to make it about me by talking about my experiences with pain. So that's that. It was a long history. I've experienced chronic neck pain since undergraduate studies, so early 2000s. Um, I grew up in a family in which my mom has had persistent recurrent pain since she was involved. Myself, my mother, and my sister were all three involved in a pretty severe car accident in, oh goodness, I would say this was like 93. But after that, my mom went on to have chronic neck pain, and I kind of was there for seeing a lot of not great healthcare consultations for many, many different titles. And kind of going through that experience, she subsequently was, on disability and hadn't worked since, and so kind of seeing the what I now was off of the world to her, and had that language then. And how impactful when I reflect on like her trajectory, how impactful that was in her life through clinically narratives and explanations for persistent neck pain after this car accident. That also influenced me at the time. I didn't know that my experiences with pain had a social cultural influence that was rooted in my upbringing. And so again, evaluating early on in life, I started getting into late high school or early college. Started had my first competition at my school and college at the age of 18. And I developed some left shoulder pain that was very persistent. And I was convinced that there was something structurally wrong with my left shoulder. I saw an orthopedic physician, I did physical therapy, I saw a chiropractor, I did massage therapy. But it wasn't getting better, so I was a patient wishing for imaging, got an MRI. There was like a small slap tear, labral tear. And the surgeon finally, probably out of frustration of my repeated concerns, decided to do arthroscopic surgery, went ahead and did a labral repair, joint debridement, and called it a day. And then even after that, I still had shoulder pain. Physical therapy was still dealing with it, and it remained for the mainstay. And then I would say around my sophomore year of college, I was doing pull-ups. I got a pretty severe muscle strain in my right trap, and that's the start of my persistent right-sided neck pain, and that's sustained. Similar trajectory of orthopedic consults, images, cortisone injections, these chiropractic care, PT, because that kind of led me into and this is in healthcare when I started chiropractic school, got at my DC the end of 2015, opened the clinic. And so going into that, I was thinking about modalities. Like I was very much an interventionalist mindset, like how am I going to fix pain? Can I get certified in rock tape? Can I get certified in ART and IASTM and all of these things because I was going to fix pain. And then I met different clinicians along the way, was challenged to think about things differently, started working in clinical practice, started my own practice in January of 2016, and realized that my view, my model of pain was very narrow, and I was very biometrically rooted. I wasn't even, my education didn't talk about models of pain. It was just this assumption that if you have pain, something's wrong, and my job as a clinician is to fix it. According, I need to do something to you. And so as I worked with more patients dealing with chronic pain, I realized that my model was very limited, and I needed to expand it from my own lived experiences, my own upbringing, had influenced the way that I experienced pain personally, but also the model that I used to deal with and how to address these issues with people. And so I worked really hard at trying to move beyond the biomedical model. And that's ultimately led me into the research world. I felt as though to this day, we are severely lacking an expanded model of understanding from a healthcare professional standpoint, how individuals with lived experiences of chronic and persistent pain. And so that's what I mostly do these days is research on chronic pain that do telehealth. Sorry, there's a bit of a long, windy answer, but hopefully it gives context.
No, I think it gives a ton of context. And, you know, how you originally kind of opened it up on, you never, as a clinician, or at least one of the things I was taught when I was diving into all these things about communication and trying to help people make sense of their pain, was that same idea of like, don't make it about you, right?
Yeah.
Because this is their experience, it's their individualized representation of what's going on in their body. Um, but then the more I started just to kind of become more open as a clinician, and how I learned to almost, ask for permission to speak my story to some people, I think it really led to some deeper connections. And you
Yeah.
have so many things that I think so many clients can connect to and hold on to. Previous traumas, like a motor vehicle accident, parents always come up, in good ways and bad ways. But I think more of the time I hear, well, I don't want to be my mom. I don't want to be my
Yeah.
dad. I don't want to be my grandfather. And then now, you're kind of seeing some of those patterns emerge. Like you've had some neck pain. I think you mentioned that your mom's had some neck pain too. So when you are thinking about helping people understand their experience and make sense of their narrative, how do you go about doing that and keeping yourself removed? Or has that maybe evolved for you over the last few years as being a clinician and researcher?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think certain cases it wouldn't work well that if I started opening up about me, like you do run the risk of, I kind of think about it if your significant other is talking to you about a bad day they had, and you start talking about your bad day as well, they're like, well, what the hell? Like I'm trying, you're
Yeah.
supposed to support me. So if it's the right case, yeah, I share more than I used to when I got started with this. Um, and when you were talking about kind of family influences, I was thinking about, I will often hear, well, I don't want to have a bad back like my dad. My dad has a bad back. My grandfather has a bad back. And so some of like just process of peeling back those layers, I tend to open up with brief questions of like, well, can you tell me a bit more what you mean by bad backs? Like, what does that mean? And they'll, say, well, they had back pain, they couldn't do X, Y, Z. And so it lets you kind of lead more into, well, you know, what did they believe low back pain meant? What were they told? What do you believe low back pain means? What have you been told? Because you try to ask open-ended questions so people will tell their story and their understanding of their own experiences. And then you have to gently try to see, can we collaborate on that a bit more, maybe expand our viewpoint of what pain means?
Right. When you bring up, you know, these roles that you were kind of going through, right? And this has also popped up a lot in multiple conversations with clinicians we've had on so far is, this, I was a bodybuilder, I was strong, I was fit, but I had this sort of like background shadow of like chronic pain in my family and traumas, and I'm moving through it. I'm moving through it. Was there ever a point where, I think you mentioned frustration of your surgeon, but was there ever a point where you started to feel frustration through this process? And it seemed like maybe you did in your story, and it turned into something good for you. You sort of like dove into the research world. So, where do you think that turning point was for you, where you sort of said, hey, you know what? If I have all these negative emotions, like so many of the patients that we work with now do, how did you go about turning it, making it into a positive, and then really listening to your story, building almost like a new identity or a new avenue for yourself, maybe even personally and professionally?
Yeah. Um, Part of my personality, which Toby added, is wanting answers. I can become a bit obsessive about it, which works in my favor in research, because you maintain tenacity and curiosity. And so that's kind of what happened is feeling as though, as a patient, I wasn't getting the answers that I felt were satisfying to me. why am I having to keep getting X, Y, or Z therapy done to fix my problems? And then from a clinician, feeling as though that was only temporary fixes for people, that the narratives I was giving only explained part of it, or probably were false at times, or were false at times, and then were temporary relief strategies for people that didn't lead to long-term help. And so that led to reading a lot. I mean, ultimately, reading a lot of research. If I feel like I don't know something, I try to read as much as I can. If I feel like someone else has some particular subset of knowledge that I could learn from, I'll reach out and make connections. I mean, that's how the whole research team I currently work with, that's how I made those connections, just reach out and partner with them, and kind of dedicating myself to prioritize this and working at it. And so that helped me reframe my own personal beliefs about pain. It helped me kind of mold my narratives to others, whether it's on social media or in telehealth these days. And so that's really influenced my understanding and approach for pain-related issues.
So it seems like you're almost kind of like internally motivated to kind of seek the truth or find that answer. And there are some clients that have that internal motivation, and some of them are more externally motivated. They need some reward system, or they need something to kind of push towards. So when you are trying to help someone make sense of their narrative, which, when I follow you on social media, that's such a recurrent message, helping people make sense. How do we go about doing that for like different styles of people? Why is that so important, in the rehab process?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person's need for an explanation. Like from my experience with healthcare, I was on a holy grail search for a diagnosis. Like, I'm going to figure out what's wrong with me. We're going to do the intervention. We're going to fix me. I'm going to be fine. And sometimes that works. Like, great. The way I think about it is, COVID vaccines are very excitable. Unfortunately, what we were impacted by a novel infection in humans we hadn't seen before. We didn't have interventional management strategies that we had research on. We hadn't had a vaccine. So people were presenting with symptoms, but we didn't have an explanation to address it. Eventually, we isolated the viral infection. We figured out a vaccine, and we treated accordingly, like we have done for quite some time with vaccines. The biomedical model, the silver bullet approach like that works quite well. In scenarios of chronic pain and persistent and recurrent, we don't have that ability. We can't link the etiology despite our best attempts, and we kind of shifted when we need decades of saying, if we take a look at back pain, well, we can look at x-rays, and we have bony misalignment for the chiropractic world, scoliosis. We can talk about various pain that we see on imaging x-rays, and then we got MRI abilities. We can talk about the neural correlates of persistent low back pain. There must be foraminal encroachment or stenosis or disc herniation, and then now with fMRI, we're saying, well, pain is not with the brain, and so we're consistently shifting the underlying etiology, which makes sense from a basic science approach, that we get better at looking for causes and explanations, and we probably get better at finding them. But it hasn't yet really translated meaningfully to the patient level. So telling someone that low back pain is caused by their bones in their back, or the discs in their spine, or the brains constantly relaying danger messages, and that's the output of pain, doesn't have meaningful translation to influence management. So when people see me, my level of depth of detail is dependent on their need for explanation. Some people I can talk to who are experiencing persistent or recurrent neck pain may be satisfied with, sometimes we just get stuck in these patterns and having persistent recurrent pain. But the good news is, nothing you said to me today gives me a lot of cause for concern that we need imaging. We need to go find a specific problem with a specific intervention to get the outcomes you're looking for. And that's a really good spot to be in, because now we can manage this conservatively. We can work through this. We can dose in movement to tolerance. We can progress towards the things you want to do, like play golf or go swimming or weightlift or whatever it may be. Whereas others may say, well, what do you think is the cause of it? I was told by so-and-so that I have disc herniations in my neck at C6, C7, and that's the problem. And so if they're saying, well, I'm having neck pain and it's occurring with ridiculous symptoms in my arm, I'm getting numbness and tingling, like, yeah, that's probably correlated. Does it change what we need to do for your case? Typically not. Here's the things we're watching for to see, do we need to do things differently? You had sudden loss of grip strength, motor weakness, loss of range of motion. Then, yeah, we're probably going to have to do something differently. So it really just depends on case context and the needs of that individual for my explanations. And I usually err on the side of minimal information. Because in my mind, I'm worried about a nocebo effect. I don't want to instill fear in the individual.
Would you mind diving into, just for, again, maybe like the lay listener, what the difference is between a placebo effect and a nocebo effect? Because many people have heard of placebo, but not enough, I think, have heard of nocebo.
Yeah. So they're Latin terms. Placebo means I shall please. That's like the translation of it. And nocebo means I shall harm. And so most people are familiar with the placebo effect, right? Because they'll say, well, it's a sugar pill, is how people talk about it. But you get some outcome. Let's say our outcome of interest, because I'm a pain researcher, is driving down a numerical pain rating. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how much pain are you in? Someone says an 8. We do something to that person and it drops to a 6. Was it what we did to them that reduced that number? Or was it a bunch of other influential factors? Maybe time had elapsed. Maybe there was a positive relationship with the clinician. Maybe, who knows, that natural history occurred. Any number of things can influence that. So when we do studies on interventions like vaccines I was talking about earlier, we do randomized controlled trials. So we compare whatever the actual interventional substance is to something that lacks that substance. And those studies work quite well in drug trials and vaccine trials, because we can isolate, for a lot of the contexts, we can isolate the active ingredient and get compared to something that doesn't have it. And so it bolsters our confidence to say the outcome we observe was likely directly attributable to the active ingredient. Where it falls apart a good bit, and we're slowly kind of evolving how we look at things from an interventional standpoint in the rehab field, pain and rehab field, is these non-pharmacological conservative management strategies. It's much harder to do that. When you're talking about education or physical activity or cognitive behavioral therapy or ACT as your intervention, we can't really isolate the active ingredient like you can in a drug trial. So we're having to evolve the ways with which we study these things. On the flip side of nocebo, with it meaning I shall harm, maybe we make your pain intensity go up, or maybe we contribute to fear avoidance behavior because we told you your neck pain is because you have poor posture, you have text neck, you have herniated discs. You should be cautious in how you move, and if you do move, here's specifically how you should. And so that can be harmful language to people, and that can make their ability to cope with and respond to pain experiences worse. And so we're balancing that between providing a reassurance and adequate information and education while giving a path forward and attempt to minimize harm with our narratives.
That's a great definition. Thank you for diving into that. And I think you bring up a couple of great points there, because there's easy ways to assess meaningful outcomes, maybe when it comes to an active ingredient. Did it work or did it not? We have a control group. We have something very tangible that we can maybe potentially measure. But with pain being, an experience, something that emerges very complexly from multiple different avenues, and you've touched on family, social, cultural already as it is, how do you measure someone's changed experience? That was always sort of what I found very challenging in the clinic. And then I think maybe the point there too with the narratives is, what I've told people is, hey, look, if you behave like you have poor posture or you have text neck. I had someone come in last week who was told that she has military neck.
Mm,
I'm not even sure if I really remember what military neck was, but it was just like super, super straight as opposed to, I
yeah,
guess, the opposite. So I was like, okay, cool. Now I have both, right? So text neck is down, military neck is all the way up.
right.
And you embody that experience. So if someone tells you something is fragile or broken, or the cause for your pain, or maybe the sole cause for your pain, you end up behaving and moving differently. And then
Yeah,
for us, we mentioned our daughters. Like if I thought I was in danger of lifting up my daughter when she was younger, she's 10 now. I don't know if she wants me to lift her up anymore, but you know, that was such, I mean, those experiences, I'm sure you can relate, of like just picking up your little girl and like hugging her. And I mean, that made me feel like $1,000,000,
yeah,
right? And then
yeah,
so many parents and grandparents who come in, they're like, well, I don't want to lift up my grandchild. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. Why not? It's like, well, because, my discs are are like pillows. Um, my spine's too unstable for that.
yeah.
And reframing that is so, so powerful. And, I think that's why I appreciate the work that you do so much, to not necessarily eliminate pain, but to change someone's lived experience as they cope with pain. I think now is some of the biggest value that I try to provide for people. And it's amazing how many people say, I'm still having some sensitivity in the back. I'm still maybe having my neck pain. I still occasionally get some of that, tingling, buzzing thing, but I know I'm not in harm's way anymore.
Yeah,
And my life bubble has grown, even though my pain bubble has kind of remained the same. I'm
yeah.
just doing more things. And I really, really think that that's valuable. So thank you for sharing that as well. Do you mind if I pivot a little bit and ask you about your research?
No, I don't have it at all.
All right. Recently, and I think you mentioned it in your intro too, that you did a study on chronic pain and mortality. Um, and this really made me pause and reflect a little bit, because I'm really excited to hear you talk about your findings, because I think maybe when I was growing into this whole, pain, neuroscience, clinical education sort of like bit, one thing I would commonly say to mostly clinicians when I was teaching was, pain hasn't killed anybody, right?
Sure.
We need to like move off of this. And it was sort of a pretty aggressive take. Again, maybe like one of those cringeworthy things where I wish I didn't say as much as I did. And yet when I look at your study, I can see sort of like the headlines booming on TikTok or Instagram, right? Like chronic pain leads to early death. So before we, listen to some animal like myself giving misinformation like I used to do, or we read, some sort of like tabloid headline on your research, what do you think that we should be taking away from the most recent trial that you published?
Yeah. Um, my hope is from a research standpoint, it ushers in more funding. Is ultimately what I'm looking for, because it just further highlights the need to address some issues related to pain from a basic science point all the way up, and ensuring that we're adequately helping individuals who are experiencing persistent recurrent pain, that we're giving equitable access to healthcare and management and long-term clinical continuity of care for these individuals. I think it will help if I talk a little bit about did the study or outcomes were, so on and so forth, to give this context. So this was an epidemiological study. So we looked at, when you talk about epidemiology, you're talking about population level. And so you're looking at generalizations. And so I've done research with National Health Interview Survey data, NHIS, which is, in essence, each year our government pays for interviewers to go out and kind of canvass the country in various geographical locations to ask all sorts of questions in person that are related to health. In essence, it's getting a pulse on the health of Americans. It could be related to any number of factors, and the questionnaire is adapted each cycle, each year. So like now we're taking in our COVID-19 questions and long COVID questions. Specific to my interest, when I started working on this data, was looking at physical activity and pain. And so we published that, I would say a year or two ago, which is the relationship between physical activity and pain in U.S. adults. And that will show us that those who met physical activity guidelines were much less likely to report experiencing chronic pain and vice versa, those experiencing chronic pain were much less likely to engage physical activity. And so subsequent to that study using NHIS data, I was expanding kind of the outcomes I was looking at. I had read a few studies in other regions across the world that looked at mortality. And so that got me thinking. I was like, well, do we have that data in the US? Have we looked at on a population level the relationship between people reporting chronic pain and mortality rates? So mortality rate being what's the expected number of people who are going to die in any given year, just because as human beings who are mortal, we do die. And so you have a rate in the US, people where mortality rate is, top 10 causes of death, stuff like that. But we didn't have a lot of data on looking at chronic pain mortality. We had some, and it was on smaller data sets, and it was somewhat conflicting. Some were saying that they found a relationship between chronic pain mortality. Others said they were able to attenuate the effect of chronic pain on mortality by adjusting for various factors related to psychosocial variables and lifestyle variables like meeting physical activity guidelines. And so I went looking to see, did the NHIS have data on this? Because it's not something that's asked about directly in the NHIS. Fortunately, the NCHS, which is kind of the hub for conducting the NHIS, does have this data. So they do what's called a data linkage program. So they linked NDI, the National Death Index. So a lot of people may not know this, but when you die, well, they probably do with COVID-19. This is a bit of a debate, what call it a death during COVID-19 time.
Right.
But if you die, it gets recorded. It gets logged under NDI. I think it's been ongoing since the 60s or 70s at this point. I mean, we've maintained a registry on this for quite some time. And so the NCHS linked NHIS data, which is on health and well-being of Americans, with NDI data. So now you're able to look at across time, if people are reporting sedentary behavior, if they're reporting hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, what's their death rate, mortality rate? And that's kind of how we figure out, like, yeah, hypertension, it's one of the ways we figure out hypertension is a risk factor for heart disease, which is a risk factor for early mortality. Well, because the NHIS started asking about pain-related topics, and specifically persistent pain in 2016, we were able to link that 2016 data and 2017 data from the NHIS to 2019 NDI data. And now this let me model what is the relationship between people reporting pain and reporting other comorbidities, psychosocial variables, physical activity levels, and what's the mortality rate. And in doing that, we found a few things. The mortality rate just for general population, I think was like 2.82%, meaning that at any given time point during our 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 data sets, 2.82% of the population were dying. And you can quantify that further. We can say that equates to X number of hundreds of thousands or millions of deaths. When we looked at people who were experiencing chronic pain, so pain that was persisting or recurring for 3 months or greater, and high impact chronic pain, so pain that's persisting or recurring for 3 months or greater, and caused the person to have an activity limitation, one or more. So they weren't able to do social or extracurricular or work-related activities. We saw a pretty significant increase in mortality rate. So it jumped up. State orders 4% for people experiencing chronic pain. I'll give you the exact numbers because I don't know, misquote my own research. And it runs the risk. We try to be very careful with our language on this because, as you alluded to, this could be one of those things that it gets misinterpreted and taken out of context, and could potentially, cause a nocebo effect in and of itself. So we found that the people with chronic pain had a 5.55% mortality rate, so about double from the general population. And then those experiencing high impact chronic pain had an 8.79% mortality rate. And this led to excess deaths. So what you can do is you can look at this and say, okay, if the mortality rate is 2.82% for the general population, how many people are dying each year? And then you can look at if the mortality rate for chronic pain is 5.55%, how many people are dying? And you look at, well, what would be the expected number of deaths and people experiencing chronic pain based on the general population mortality rate of 2.82? And you can subtract those two numbers and see that it's contributing to excess deaths. And when you look at it even more, you can do some modeling. It's called hazard ratios. So hazard ratios is a risk factor measurement. It looks to see, does the experience of chronic pain and high impact chronic pain have no effect on your risk of death, mortality, an increased effect or a decreased effect? That's kind of the spectrum you can be at. We found that it increases the risk of mortality. So that just means that those who are experiencing chronic or higher impact chronic pain have a higher risk of being assumed dead at follow-up versus those who weren't experiencing these two issues. It was pretty significant. We went through the process and controlled for a lot of things. We controlled for demographics, so age, sex, race. We controlled for psychosocial variables, so related to activity limiting anxiety and depression and emotional problems. And we controlled for lifestyle factors, so BMI, physical activity levels, and looked to see, well, could we drive down the mortality risk that we were seeing increase to these individuals with chronic pain and high impact chronic pain? And we could, if we control for these confounding variables, if we control for psychosocial variables, if we control for lifestyle variables, we could bring it down from what it was, but it was still noticeably elevated. So just to give you an idea, let me find it real quick. When we adjusted for psychosocial variables, for demographics, for lifestyle variables, we still saw that those that were having chronic pain and high impact chronic pain were still having elevated mortality risks. So for an example, for chronic pain, it was still 1.225 times higher. For high impact chronic pain, it was still 1.657 times higher, meaning around 22% to 65% higher for experiencing these issues. So we were able to reduce it, but it's still a meaningful, both statistically and to me clinically meaningful difference, I think, mortality risk for these individuals. And so that ultimately what led me and my co-authors to conclude is there's probably social determinants of health at play here. There are external factors influencing what we're seeing. I just don't know how else we could explain it. To still see a meaningful elevated mortality risk for these individuals. So thinking about things like access to healthcare, to have continuity of care long term, receiving the type of healthcare that we should be giving, so following safe clinical practice guidelines for these cases. That's kind of where I think will be led in future research investigations, is looking at the influence of social determinants of health, things that are external to an individual. And I think it's much needed. We're very often hyper-focused on looking inward into the individual, like what's wrong with you to have these experiences. And it's much harder for us to zoom out and say, well, hold on, what's the environment like? What's the social cultural norms like? What is in place that is bringing forth these experiences or intensifying these experiences or making them worse for individuals? It's interesting because my master's is in exercise science. So for a long time, I've focused on looking at lifestyle factors because of that. And we saw and are seeing a similar approach with obesity issues and saying, like, hey, there are environments that have been set up that magnify the obesity issue, that this isn't someone's lack of willpower or lack of ability. And we're realizing that there are external factors that are making this much worse at a population and individual level. And I'm kind of seeing a similar thing in our pain research, that we're needing to realize that there are external factors in the individual. And I think it's important too, because the history of working with people dealing with persistent recurrent pain has been quite stigmatizing. It's a lot of patient blaming. It's a lot of you weren't active enough, or you're too active,
Sure.
or you're overweight, or you're underweight, or you're not managing your stressors. And so we're very much stuck in a pattern of like, this is your fault. It's kind of like shaking your finger at your kid versus saying like, have I set up the environment in a way with which would help people to thrive and have
Right.
either less pain and or cope better with.
Right. I think that's so important, not only for patients listening, but for clinicians listening, because I think the social determinants of health kind of get swept under the rug by a lot of us because we don't feel in control of them. And
Yeah.
as I think a provider who is supposed to give something, right? And I think initially earlier in your days as a provider, you were trying to fix a person's pain, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm gathering from you and others is that pain is an experience, and it's maybe a lifetime of experiences that have built up to this, single point interaction that you and have with a clinician. Oh, and you only have 60 minutes to sort of like figure it out. Right. That's
Right.
another problem, like with that social determinant model, is that, I think sometimes I can talk to people for probably 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours if I had the time and they would let me. Whereas other people come in and they get it really quickly in 20, 30 minutes. And we're sort of like, watching our watches as the session passes. So I think you bring up there such a valuable point. And, for me as a clinician, it's something I've always really been intrigued by, those social factors. And especially when it always came to longevity, because so many people would come in and tell me that, they don't go out anymore with friends or family. They're staying away from parties. They're not interacting with kids. And my question is always like, well, why are you staying away from those? And it usually comes back down to the biomedical explanations that they've been given. Well, this is impinged or this is too weak. And I have to hit all these prerequisites, before I do all these things again. I have to, hold a plank. I have to do this. I have to, go through a 12-week exercise program. And then I always just kind of keep, swirling in my mind. It's not something I directly say to patients, but I'm like, why? Why is that? Why are all these clinicians kind of really kind of stuck in that mindset or that mentality? I think that will kind of bring us into this question of you individually with your practice. It seems like it's mostly virtual, if not all virtual. You do a lot of education there. So what makes, you and your practice that tame pain, which I absolutely love, right? Not eliminate pain, not crush it, not kill it, tame it. What makes that different than other models that are out there that you've seen?
Yeah, this is a good question. And to your point, the branding was quite purposeful. When I work with humans, I don't typically set the expectation like, hey, we're going to eliminate this. You're never going to have this experience. Instead, we say, pain is a part of human existence. And more importantly, usually the question we're asking is, what are our responses to those experiences? And so I think that's what we do quite well. I like the setup because, yes, we do a consultation. We allocate the 60 minutes to it. And kind of an aside to say, some of my research is taking me into the emergency department, and a lot of my teacher investigation will be coming out of that. And it's because the truncation of time. A lot of times you're talking 7 minutes or less on these consults, and so that's just not enough time. And there's no continuity of care. There's no follow up. There's no, here's a list of referrals that you can go follow up with, and whether they do or don't. And so we are able, virtually to give that 60 minutes, but then also we have a lot of people, if not almost the majority, sign up for long-term programming with us, which is a monthly subscription, reasonably priced, and we can maintain, they a lot of times like individualized activities and exercises. My bias is the individualized communication. I'm like, I don't think we're programming anything magical. It's just individualized to you. But I like that I can keep talking to you and communicate. Send you videos, and I can send you videos. So I look at it as getting a guide. We're able to come alongside you, walk with you through this process, learning how to respond to things, gaining new understanding. And I think about it, having now taught in higher ed for a number of years, it's like taking a class, because you don't go in and learn everything you need to learn about a particular topic in one day, 1 week, 1 month, and typically not even one class. Education is this ongoing evolutionary process And so I kind of looked at the rehabilitative process being very similar.
Yeah. Oh man, absolutely love it. Reminds me a lot of the model that we've sort of slowly built at Strength and Motion too. And I think you hit the nail on the head, just as our previous guests, Tyler Khaleesi did and Mike Stella did. It's like, you can get programming on ChatGPT now.
Yeah.
Hey, how do I build a program for strength in 2 days and 20 minutes? And ChatGPT is going to spit something out.
Yeah, it is probably
I don't
good.
Yeah, it's probably not bad, right? And I'm like, and that's what I tell people. I'm like, that's not really the fee you're paying for. It's being able to reach out to me at any moment in time. It's being able to ask questions. It's being able to, modify your programming on the fly. And, something that I've always took from Craig Liebenson was, let's fail as fast as possible. But you and me working together in that guide sort of position allows us to fail as fast as possible and then know what can work for you in a sense to help you achieve your goals. So I absolutely love that. I think that's a really big piece that's missing or maybe lost upon a lot of clients when they look at numbers and finances and all the sort of money they've put in going back to social determinants to try to solve their problem and not having maybe access to a clinician like yourself. So thank you for doing that. Can I throw one last question at you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
All right. This is another one that we sort of closing out with a lot of guests. What do you think is your biggest piece of advice for those with chronic pain listening?
That's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is know that you're not broken, right? I think there are a lot of feelings that get wrapped up in experiencing chronic pain, self-doubt, shame, guilt, and ultimately isolation a lot of times. And so I think the first step is knowing like you're not broken and that there are ways with which we can typically put better with our experience that oftentimes does coincide with noticing less pain as time goes on and as we improve our responses. And so there are people out there like you all that are here to help and willing to help and are trying very hard to change the way we do things in healthcare. And so having that understanding you're not broken, finding things that you can do, even if it's with some pain, is pretty huge. If you just say, I'm ready to do whatever, if it's walk to my mailbox and check my mail, can we walk halfway with some pain? And then next time, can we walk a little bit farther and a little bit farther? Before you know it, you're walking past your mailbox.
Right.
It doesn't have to be pain-free, and it's okay to have some pain. I think that would be the best advice I could give.
Amen. And I wish we could put that on some sort of like solid piece of stone and just hang it up in my clinic. Yeah, you're not broken. That's a great, amazing takeaway. Michael, how do people find you? How do people work with you? What's the best way?
Yeah. The easiest way is just go to our website, Tamepain, TAMEPAIN.com. And you can find all of our social media links there and date, all that good stuff. You can, if you want to follow my research, there's research date that has all of my up-to-date publications on it. Just search Michael Ray, and that'll bring me up. And if you need to reach out via email, it can just be michael@tamepain.com, and you'll be able to get me there as well. I'm pretty responsive.
All right. Thank you very much. Michael, appreciate your time. Much love to you. As Joe Gambino would say to our listeners, much love to everybody out there. And if you've made it this far into the episode, extra love to you. We will see you again next week. Michael, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it, man.
Thanks.